This is, of course, the ultimate exterminationist war hawk. And there's a photo, a large photo of him from AP, looking out the window of an Israeli kindergarten, said to be damaged by a rocket fired by Palestinian militants from inside the Gaza Strip. Now, this interesting picture, because you're looking out an open window, both frames of the window, which are sliders left to right, are intact. The glass isn't even broken. The little bit of the mortar on the outside is chipped, and he's got this terribly dour look on his face, and it goes on and on. We've seen it. The so-called Hamas fighters, soldiers, are gunmen. It's all a matter of semantic manipulation. They're gunmen. Gunmen. What are gunmen? They're not freedom fighters. They're not resistance fighters. They're not fighting to try to secure what little tiny foothold on a human living situation that they have. They're called gunmen, i.e. criminals. And yet the criminality, of course, is being perpetrated upon them by their neighbors. The white phosphorus dropping, new weapons testing Israeli so-called defense forces. Nothing defensive about what's going on here now at all, in the opinion of most of the world. Okay, let's go back to your book now and talk about the part of the title, the subtitle, well, it's not a subtitle, but the second part of the title, from its own texts. There have been many stories on the Internet citing texts and quotes from the Talmud, which apologists and others are quick to say have been mistranslated. What are people to make of that kind of effort to obfuscate the reality and totality of these texts? How errant are the translations of the old Talmud?
Well, they try to say that, and they try to say that the Talmud is just a collection of debates. It's not actually authoritative. It's actually an indication of how democratic and freewheeling Judaism really is. All of this preys on the ignorance of people, including many Judaics themselves who have never seen the Talmud and have only perhaps read some extracts from it in a magazine or newspaper or something like that.
Michael, may I modify that, or not amplify it, rather, just real quickly? I got an email from an Israeli who's talking about exactly what you just mentioned. He said, let's see, regarding the Talmud, I studied it a little bit in school when I was a kid. Now, this guy's a military veteran. I was extremely horrified in recent years to learn on the Internet the true nature of the Talmud. The average Israeli never read the Talmud and has no idea what it's all about. We always left it to religious nuts, and now we're paying for it. So there you go.
Well, that's interesting because, of course, I did have some Judaic help with my book. And what people don't realize is not only this secular gentleman who really didn't have very much training, but some of the ones who are most hostile and most angry are those who are trapped inside Orthodox Judaism, the Bakurim, the Talmidim, the ones who are in the yeshiva. And they're there because grandma or grandpa, their bubby, is paying their way through, or they want to marry a girl who's Orthodox, or they just don't have a way out, and they're trapped inside of there. There's a great deal of anger because this is a religion of oppression not only of Palestinians and other Gentiles, but beginning with the Judaics themselves. But to answer your question, we have a very good translation for those who do not read Aramaic in the original, and that's the Steinsaltz translation, which unfortunately Random House stopped about just a little bit more than midway through the publication. Random House stopped it for reasons that have never been clear, and of course we could speculate as to what those reasons are. But nonetheless, there are 21 volumes of the Steinsaltz Talmud that are available out of what one could generalize and say approximately 35 volumes of the Gemara. The Talmud is actually comprised of two sets of books, the Mishnah, which corresponds to the oral tradition that Jesus confronted when it was still oral and hadn't been committed to writing. And then when Israel became really corrupt by crucifying their Messiah, as a symptom of that corruption, they committed this oral tradition, which had haunted them for centuries, to writing in the form of the Mishnah, thereby institutionalizing it. And then after the Mishnah, from the 2nd to the 4th century onward, came the Gemara, and those books together are collectively known as the Talmud. But one of the things I try to point out in my book, Jeff, is that there are many more authoritative texts which have followed up on these, because when the old saw about, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Well, the web of Judaism is very tangled indeed, and it goes all the way up to the Mishnah Berurah commentaries and authoritative halakha, which is still being written to this day. So you're actually talking about hundreds and hundreds of compendiums of books related to literally millions of laws.
Wow. That's a gigantic amount of material.
Yes, it's an enormous compendium, and then what we try to focus on in the beginning of Judaism Discovered is on the roots of the halakha itself. In other words, to document what is the law, the halakha of Orthodox Judaism. It certainly isn't the Old Testament. As Jesus himself said in Mark chapter 7, you nullify the Word of God. You teach for doctrine the commandments of men, because that's what it actually is. It's the religion of men, the Torah Shebel Peh, which is their Torah, not the Torah of Yahweh. And the roots of this halakha are in the Mishnah, they're in the Gemara, they're also in the Zohar, they're in the Kabbalah, they're in the Mishnah Torah of Maimonides, they're in the Tur, that's T-U-R, of the Rosh, Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, and I could go on and on, the Shulchan Aruch of Joseph Caro, and many others of these, which are, they're a living document to these people today, and they rule every aspect of their lives. One of the things I point out in the book is how regimented Judaic women are, for example, with regard to their menstrual period and the time after the period, how neurotic they have to be about any spotting of blood, how both the husband and wife have to be virtually psychotic in spotting this blood. The rabbi can be called in to examine the woman's underclothing. I mean, the whole thing is a compendium of insanity. And I've often said that the Freudian psychology is actually directed at the Talmudic mentality and not the Gentile mentality, because most of his patients were coming out of this insane asylum and were victims of it. And that's where he got a lot of his really far-out concepts about penis envy and Oedipus complexes and so forth. It comes straight out of a Talmudic mentality.
Remarkable. All right. Be right back with the amazing scholar and historian Michael Hoffman. Okay, and guests just below Michael Hoffman's name. By the way, you can click on Michael's name and go right to his website. The two parts of the review of his book by Brother Nathaniel Kapner, raised a Jew, now a Christian. Very interesting. One of the quotes in the interview, continuing his censure, Hoffman illustrates how the, quote, Israeli citizen, end quote, presents to the world the image of the aggressive killer, no longer possessing the, quote, exiled, hunted Jew image. The Israeli is now the hunter and exile of others. Expanding on this new image of the Jew, Hoffman writes that in the third world, the Jew is no longer viewed as the passive and pitiable scholar whose beard is yanked by the jackbooted Nazi. Instead, he is rather perceived to be himself the jackbooted Zio-Nazi. What's the difference between the alleged excesses of Nazi Germany and what's going on the West Bank today?
Yes, indeed. And also, what would be the difference between the Israeli and American policy toward civilian populations and what the Allies visited on Japan and German civilian populations in World War II? I think that there's a parallel there. Yeah. You can see it today in today's New York Times. The January 14th New York Times has a very interesting column. It's ladled with some doublespeak. It's by Tom Friedman, the great cheerleader of the Iraq War, and basically a vigorous supporter of all the Israeli wars. But in his column today, Jeff, I recommend that everybody go on the New York Times website and take a peek at it. he's actually, in a very subtle way, somewhat indirectly, he's talking about the necessity of inflicting collateral casualties on the Palestinians the way the Israelis did it in Lebanon in 2006.